Hey, good day, and welcome to episode 5 of Alternatives to D&D. I'm Marty Walser, also known as Raging Owlbear on social media. And this week I wanted to talk to you about another alternative to D&D. This is another fantasy game. I've been focusing mostly on fantasy, but I will be doing some science fiction stuff in the future. And this week, though, I'm going to be talking about Hackmaster. This is the Hackmaster 5th edition's Player's Handbook. There's a little joke there in that the 5th edition is technically only the 2nd edition of the game that was produced. Because Hackmaster started out as an in-comic joke from Knights of the Dinner Table, which is written by Jolly Blackburn, and appeared in Dragon Magazine and various other places. Had its own comic. Still has its own comic. And in the comic book, the characters are playing the Hackmaster game, which was sort of a jokey mashup of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and Rollmaster. Well, as it turns out, years after the comic had appeared in Dragon Magazine, it was reprinted incorrectly. It was published in digital format by TSR, and at the time they did not have the digital rights to that, and so of course the IP holders for Jolly Blackburn and Dave Kenzer and whatnot were a little bit concerned that their rights had been infringed, and so they actually settled out of court with TSR, and at the time, part of that settlement included the rights to produce the Hackmaster game, Hackmaster 4th edition, which was a parody of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It was basically using the AD&D rule set, but they threw in some, charts and tables and other stuff to sort of go along with the theme of being sort of a mishmash of AD&D and Rollmaster and whatnot. But it really was considered a sort of an AD&D clone. It was really the first of its kind. It was even before the open gaming license had been published by Wizards of the Coast. So the original Hackmaster is kind of the first old school revival game, even though it's not really part of the OSR. It was kind of its own thing that occurred prior to the open gaming license. So they put out Hackmaster 4th edition, put out many supplements. They did a bunch of parody modules that mimicked the ones that were, out in the Greyhawk world by TSR, such as the Tomb of Horrors and Keep on the Borderlands and stuff like that. They had a parody module each for this. Well, as the game matured and grew, they actually wrote a new version, Hackmaster 5th edition, which is this version. And it actually is a different game than Hackmaster 4th edition. It's truly a completely sort of separate game. It's no longer D&D-like, although it has a lot of the trappings of a D&D-like game. There's a lot of very specific differences as well, which I will talk about, because some of them ones that I particularly like attracted me to this game, and I want to tell you why I think this is another fun alternative to sort of standard D&D. Oddly enough, is having been originally a fictional parody of AD&D, they had a fictional author in the comic named Gary Jackson, which was sort of obviously a mishmash of Gary Gygax and Steve Jackson. Well, and the interesting thing about this is Hackmaster 5th edition kind of takes that mishmash to the next level, because a lot of what is in Hackmaster, especially with character creation, almost feels like a mishmash of sort of AD&D character creation and a little bit of GURPS thrown in. Because one of the neat things about the Hackmaster character classes is that, like with original D&D, you roll 3d6, 7 times. There's 7 stats actually. The 6 basic that from D&D, and they have a looks stat, a comeliness, if you're familiar with the old AD&D, except they call it looks, and like with old school basic D&D, you roll the 3d6 straight up, straight down the line for each of the stats, and you see what you get, which could turn out really odd depending upon how the dice roll in your favor. But the nice thing is that they mitigate some of that sort of wacky luck with build points, which means you have still a kind of a point buy addition on to your character. Now, I haven't made a whole lot of Hackmaster characters because I don't get to play this game very often, unfortunately. But, again, it can mitigate, the build system can mitigate some of that bad luck if you happen to roll badly, because you can raise attributes and you can use the build points, of course, to buy skills and other talents and whatnot. So it makes a really interesting mashup of sort of that old school D&D of you're rolling straight down the line for your attributes, for your scores, and you might get some kind of wacky numbers, and then having sort of the customization that a game like GURPS allows, a more point based, because there's an extensive skill system and there's talents and there's quirks and flaws similar to a game like GURPS or Hero or whatnot. That allow you to sort of juggle, add points to your character, or spend them, obviously. So that's one of the really kind of neat things about the character creation in Hackmaster is that it does have this combination of a D&D system plus a Hero or GURPS like point buy system sort of combined into one system. Another really kind of fun thing is the magic system is a little bit more straightforward. It has some of that sort of Vancian style, spell slot style magic that D&D has, except that it uses, for instance, wizards have spell points, and they spend spell points to cast their spells instead of sort of Vancian magic. But what it does is that, if, as an example, if you are a 5th level wizard, you have a 1st level spell, a 2nd level spell, a 3rd level spell, a 4th level spell, and a 5th level spell, plus sort of 2 cantrip, what are called journeyman and apprentice spells, which are sort of like low level cantrips. And the nice thing about that is that, so it's a very basic. I memorized a spell for each level, plus I get a couple of cantrip like spells. But even if I haven't memorized a certain spell for the day, I can still attempt to cast it by spending more of my spell points to cast the spell that I haven't memorized for that day. So again, it mixes that idea of sort of the D&D style. I have to memorize and then I forget my spell after I've cast it, versus like a spell point system which allows you to cast whichever spells are on your list. It sort of mixes the two nicely, because you just have to spend more of your spell points on spells that you haven't memorized, say within the last day. So those spells that you haven't committed to memory cost you more because you're trying to sort of pull out that knowledge from your hind brain, as it were, or from the universe at large. So that makes a nice little balancing mechanic of having sort of the memorized spells, but having some flexibility, a little more like a sorcerer style. So that's how mages work in Hackmaster. Similarly, clerics have sort of schools of clerical study, which is very reminiscent of sort of the second edition advanced D&D second edition specialty priest. So you're a priest of light, you're a priest of justice, you're a druidic priest. So basically your clerical order sort of determines the style of magic that you practice. And that's really nice. I kind of like that sort of throwback to the AD&D style specialty priests. And so that's fun. And again, if I'm a 5th level cleric, I have a 1st level spell, 2nd level spell, 3rd level spell, 4th level spell, 5th level spell. And that's the thing. The spell levels, unlike a D&D style game, the spell levels, you get a spell at each level for that particular spell, power. Not like D&D where it's like, okay, I have 1st level spells until I'm 3rd level, in which case I get a 2nd level spell. But wait, I don't get a 3rd level spell until I'm 5th level. That's kind of confusing for somebody who's new to the game. Like, you would think, hey, I'm a 5th level spellcaster. Why don't I have 5th level spells? Like, well, you actually only have 3rd level spells. You don't have 5th level spells. So D&D has a very strange way of categorizing spell power that's different than the way you categorize your character level. Hackmaster doesn't do that. Hackmaster has spells for each level of your character. So there's a sort of a more finite step up to the next power level when you're looking at spells in the Hackmaster system. So that's a nice little thing too. It kind of gets rid of that sort of confusion between, I'm a 5th level caster, but I can't cast a 5th level spell. And I like the fact that you have one spell of each level that you can memorize or whatever that you can utilize for that day, because it limits down the amount of magic, the power of magic. So it makes for a little bit more of a low power magic game. But again, mages have the capability of trying to overextend themselves. And there are actually other ways, optional rules within the Game Master Guide that allow your mages to overextend themselves even further. So you can try to overpower a spell to make it stronger, by spending more spell points. But there, of course, there's always a chance that it blows up in your face. So there's a lot of really nice little features of the spell system which are fun and different from D&D, which really is appealing with Hackmaster. But probably one of my favorite parts of the Hackmaster style of play is combat. And the reason is combat is really... I can't even think of the right word. Really present. So when you take a standard turn-based D&D game, you spend a lot of time, especially if you have players who have analysis paralysis or perhaps don't know the character very well. You do spend a lot of time kind of waiting for your turn. And that is a drawback of a D&D style game, is there's that sort of downtime in combat, and combat can take longer because of it and stuff like that. Hackmaster has a really, really cool combat system which makes everybody at the table sort of focused in on the action at the table at the time of combat. So you don't have one person kind of taking a long time with their turn, especially if they're a caster or something, and they're kind of fumbling around and maybe they don't know their character well enough. That's one of the things that is a little bit more challenging in Hackmaster, is that if you are a spellcaster, you really need to kind of focus in on what you're good at and know your spells and stuff like that. But of course, again, you only have one of each spell level, so it's a little bit easier. But getting back to combat, Hackmaster has a count up initiative, which means that every action you takes a number of seconds, and depending upon the action, it may vary on the amount of seconds it takes. So, as an and you start out it as an initiative. So everybody rolls a die for initiative just like normal, except that you might roll, if you're a rogue or something like that, you might roll a d4, or if you're particularly quick, you might roll a d6, and that's the very first second you start on is that roll. And if you're a really slow character, you might even have to roll a d12, in which case that can be trouble, because it means that you're standing around and you're a deer in headlights as the action starts up, and you're like, oh my gosh, because you're not quite as resilient in combat. This is kind of a really cool thing, and it makes fast characters very, very challenging, because if you're a fast character and you're not swinging a huge sword, you can actually do a lot of damage. And let me give you an example. So, like I said, it uses a count up initiative system, and each action you take adds to your next action. So I might draw a bow, and that takes 2 seconds to get my bow out, and then I have to knock an arrow, that's another second. Or I have to pull an arrow from my scabbard, that's another second. I have to pull the arrow, that's another second. I have to aim, maybe I take a few seconds, and then boom. So like all those actions of pulling out my bow, getting my arrow ready, pulling the thing, firing, all that, it's going to take me 5 or 6 seconds. Whereas a character who maybe they're a dagger fighter and they pull out their daggers, so 1 second I pull my daggers, 2 seconds I'm stabbing you already, 3 seconds, you have with quicker weapons, you have a quicker recovery, you get to do more actions, you may not do as much damage as the slower weapons, the slower larger weapons. I'm swinging a big, heavy, large sword, and man, I hit you, I'm going to do a lot of damage. But it's also going to take me some time to recover and, sort of get back in position. I got to be back in a guard position. But the point is that they use weapon speeds and action speed to determine when you go next. And that is fully up to the character as to when they go next, because it's based upon how long their current action is going to take. So again, it's being a spellcaster. That's a nice balancing factor, because if I'm casting a big spell, it's going to take me several seconds to do all the spell casting. I've got to make sure that I'm not going to get stabbed in that time, because I could lose my spell. Or again, I might be the knight and have a bigger sword, but that dagger fighter, if he's quick, he might be able to try to get in a couple jabs at me. Now, I've probably got heavy armor, so it's going to be harder for him to do damage. But he's probably going to get more hits or more attacks in on me than I may get on him if I'm using a much slower, heavier weapon. This is a really, really fun, cool system, actually. And yet, it may not always be perfectly simulated. It's not a perfect simulation, but it's really a good sort of sim style combat for a D&D style game. And I really, really like that, because basically every second in combat is an important second, and everybody is focused in on the table, because as the game master is counting up those initiative points, you gotta kind of know what you're going to be doing, how long it's going to take you. You're also focused in on the combat, because everybody is moving their characters at the same time. Because every second, if you're in a jog, if your character's jogging towards the action, you're moving every second. The only time you're not moving is when you're standing still, which you shouldn't be doing, probably, because standing still can be deadly. But that's the nice thing about it, is every player is paying attention to the combat, because the combat feels very dynamic. It changes quickly. There's all these things going, and to add on to that, weapons do penetration damage. So once they get past the armor, so the armor blocks a certain amount of damage, but once the damage gets past the armor, you can have penetration damage, which means you're, depending upon the weapon, it does more damage, because it pierces a vital organ and stuff like that. You also have what are called exploding dice, which, if you're familiar with other game systems, when you roll, as an example, in some other game systems, if you're rolling 6-sided dice, every time you roll a 6, you add another die and you roll that. You add another die. Hackmaster has a very similar system of, when you roll the high number on the die that you're rolling for damage or whatnot, you can add more dice into the damage, depending upon the weapon and stuff like that. But the point is that you can go from getting a regular hit that penetrates the armor, that can suddenly, boom, oh, you have pierced the guy's kidney, he's in serious trouble now, So unlike sort of a D&D game where standard hit points get whittled down a little by little, and so combats after the first few levels are less dangerous, because you have so many hit points and they get whittled down. It's a slow process. In Hackmaster, it can be a very quick process. You can get stabbed and you're done. I'm not necessarily saying that happens all the time, but it is a much more deadly game because of the way damage works, the way penetration works through your armor, and the way the dice pool works when somebody rolls really well. Pardon me. So that's probably my favorite aspect of Hackmaster, is that sort of dynamic, gritty, deadly combat. Because the other thing is that you really need to think about when you go into combat. I mean, it's not just, oh, there's some monsters, let's just go fight them. The default assumption is not necessarily that you're going to fight, because fighting is deadly, it's dangerous. So that tends to change the dynamic of the role-playing part of the game, because you're not necessarily trying to get in a brawl with everything you meet on the road. And that's one of the issues I kind of have with D&D, is that combat is, because it's not dangerous after first, second, third level, after you've gotten a couple levels, combat is not dangerous, so people aren't really afraid to get into combat. And so all the combats are a little bit, I don't want to say the same, but it feels like there aren't many times players don't search for alternative actions because they just assume, oh, here's an encounter, and encounter means combat. Now, a game system like Hackmaster, because it's so dangerous to get into a combat that you know that you're not absolutely positive you're going to win. Like if you have overwhelming numbers, if you have overwhelming odds, then combat, yeah, obviously you can jump in there and kick some butt really quickly and knock the foes down. But any time outside of that, combat is very dangerous. So that means the players are often going to seek alternative means. Now, there may not always be alternative means. And again, it's a dungeon crawl, old school style game. So, sometimes combat is just, it is what it is. Where you run in, you kick open the door, you fight the monsters, you collect the treasure, whatever. But I like it when a game takes some of that focus off of not every makes it so that not every encounter is automatically a combat encounter. That the players think, you know what, I don't want to die. I don't want my player to die. Not my player. I don't want my player to die. I don't want my character to die. So what can I do to either stack the odds in my favor so that, combat is less dangerous because we can hit them with an overwhelming force, or are there alternatives to combat, or is there a way around this encounter, or but it even though like D&D there's a boatload of combat rules, so you think, oh well, this is a combat game. Those kinds of decision points de-emphasize some of those combat decisions, and so that's really nice. So a cool character creation system, a really nice different flavored magic system than standard sort of the D&D style game, deadly combat, lots of exploration possibilities, and these just really nice old school style play, although again, it does have a lot of that sort of modern mechanic feel to it as well, because you do have this robust skill system, talents and quirks and flaws, and so there's a lot of role-playing opportunities within the system is emphasizing. Oh, which brings me actually to another point I want to. There's another score on your character that isn't rolled up called honor, and the honor points are really important to Hackmaster. They're not quite alignment. Hackmaster has the D&D style alignment, but honor points also sort of determine how your characters are seen by non-player characters. If you have a high honor, it means you've sort of played your character in line with your alignment, and you can have a good character that has low honor. You can have an evil character that has a high honor. So because it fluctuates for various reasons in the game, but it's a really neat system. If you are not interested in jumping into the full Hackmaster system off the bat, they actually have a free PDF, a free basic game PDF, the Hackmaster Basic. This is the old school print book for Hackmaster Basic, which they don't have anymore, but they do have the PDFs. They have Hackmaster Basic, absolutely free. You can look at the system. I mean, it is pared down to the very base classes: fighter, mage, rogue, cleric, etc. And so it's a little bit more limited. It doesn't have a lot of the build options that the full Player's Handbook has. But it's a free PDF. You can look at the system. You can sort of understand how it runs, how it plays. So it's a great sort of try before you buy. And then they have what's called the Basic Plus, which is just a $10 PDF, which includes more than the basic. It adds a little bit more. Instead of just like the first 3 or 4 levels, it has 10 levels of play. Both the Hackmaster Basic Plus have like an introductory adventure in them. So it's a great try before you buy system. to look at. So you can say, hey, you know what? We can play a quick one session if we want to try it out. Play the first three levels, whatnot. And then the buy-in, the $10 buy-in is pretty cheap for 10 levels of the game, and monsters and stuff like that. So, and then of course the hardbacks are pretty prodigious. Oh, and I don't have the hardback monster manual. It's called the Hacklopedia of Beasts, but it is an absolutely gorgeous book. I mean, I wish I had it to show, but there's actually a sample of a couple of the pages in the free PDF of what the Hacklopedia of Beasts looks like. It has an owl beast entry, and it has the goblin entry, and you can see the artwork is beautiful. You see how the stat block looks, how it works. It's just player's handbook. Of course, this is this beautiful, sort of leathery, embossed, lovely book. Super thick, lots of the base character classes: fighter, fighter, rogue, mage, cleric, and then it has some of the fighter variations: paladin, knight, ranger. So there's a nice emphasis on melee classes too. There's only the two spellcasting classes, the mage and the cleric, and then there's a lot of the melee classes. So that's another sort of nice emphasis that this system has over, say, 5th edition D&D, where a lot of the classes have spells. I mean, when you think about it, a lot of the class paths, even fighter class paths, have the Eldritch Knight. The bards, of course, have spells. The thief has the thief spellcaster. My mind is blanking out. But point is, 5th edition has a lot of magic built in. The paladins get spells, rangers get spells, sorcerers, warlocks. All these classes have their own spells, stuff like that. It's kind of nice that Hackmaster kind of goes back to that old school. You have mages and you have clerics, and they get some spells, but there's a lot of martial classes that have their own special abilities that are based on the fighter, the ranger, the paladin, and the knight. So that's sort of Hackmaster in a nutshell. The reason I like it is again, it has a cool character creation system, has a nice spell system, has great combat. It is very grid based. The combat sort of assumes that you're doing a grid. You could do Theater of the Mind, but it's a little bit harder because again, movement and weapon speed and all those things combine to create a very dynamic combat on the table. So it's nice if you have some terrain or you're using like Roll20 or something like that. To have all the live action movement and the dynamics of the combat that the system supports. So check out the free PDF. I'll put the links on the blog at kenzerco.com with the Hackmaster PDF. Again, it's free to download, to try out. You should definitely check this out. It's a cool system. And I'll be doing some other systems in upcoming weeks. I'll be starting to dive into sci-fi. We've got the Mutant Crawl Classics, which is the sort of the old school Gamma World-esque style game. There's the Expanse RPG, which uses the Age system, like Fantasy Age, Dragon Age, and then the Expanse, which is a really great sci-fi show. So that's pretty much it for now. This was Hackmaster. I hope you've enjoyed the series. Please like and please subscribe. I don't do these videos very often, but I hope that you enjoy them. So subscribe so it pops up for you when I put out a new one. And of course, it helps me out to get my little ratings up on the YouTubes. So check out some of my other videos. I have a lot of D&D videos. I talk about other systems recently: Castles and Crusades, The One Ring, Adventures in Middle Earth, The Lone Wolf. So there's a lot of different great alternatives that I've been talking about so far. I hope you like the series. I've been Marty Walzer, also known as the Raging Owlbear on social media, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a good day.